What's up, everybody? Welcome into the Fantasy Effect. This is episode 62. We're going to be going over some of the rookie tight ends in the upcoming NFL draft. We are brought to you by Dynasty Theory in partnership with Dynasty Daddy. You'll notice Ron is not here today, so I'm stumbling through the intro, doing my best to get through that. It's a bit of a mouthful. Ron makes it look easier than it is. Holler, what's up, man?
What's up? I think you did all right. Yeah, but at the end of the day, Ron, he kind of flies through that pretty easily, and so I'm always impressed. But I'm doing
Same.
well. I feel like it's been a while since I've been on. I was gone last week. The week before was my wife's birthday, so it's good to be back. And every week, like I'm getting more excited. Like about the draft is getting closer. We recently did a rookie draft because we're crazy. One of the leagues that Roy. I was super happy he did that. I only had one. I won that league, so I only had one pick, but still, it's just fun to see kind of
Had to
where
throw that
guys
in there.
went. Yeah.
Yeah. Had
No,
to
I
throw
had
it in
to.
that you won. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I had only had one pick, so I picked at 312, so like the last pick. But it was really fun to see. Like there were some trades, and there was where guys went. It was pretty chalk, to be honest. I know
Yeah.
Roy likes to do some like he plays a little different than other people, so it was cool to see like where people went, and it was good.
For sure. No, I love doing rookie drafts before the NFL draft. It's
Yep.
just it's a little extra spice. It's really fun.
Absolutely. You got to do your
Hey,
homework.
oh, for sure. Playing Devi helps, right? Because then you kind of are familiar
Yep.
with some of these guys.
Yeah. Totally.
All right, let's get into some of the news, like the big news today. Right, we'll just jump right into it. Stephon Diggs got traded to the Houston Texans, so I think the end of the day, the trade value was they sent Diggs a 24 to sixth round pick, 25 fifth round pick from the Bills, go to the Texans, and then the Bills got the Vikings 25 second round pick, which might be a fairly early pick. I would assume that's going to be like a top 50 pick, just because I
Yeah.
don't think they're kind of in a rebuild. So I think that's feels really good value for the Bills to get that from
Totally.
Stephon Diggs, because I mean he's on the wrong side of 30 now. His play has kind of declined a little bit, but what were your thoughts on that?
So I was a little bit bummed to see that because I'm a big fan of Nico and a big fan
Mm,
of Tank. So I think that the biggest thing taken away from that is I think it was good for the Bills. I know they've been wanting to get away from Stephon Diggs. He's kind of been a
yeah,
cancer in the locker room.
yeah,
But then I'm really hoping that that cancer doesn't come over to the Texans, right? Because the Texans are really going in the right direction. I think the coaching staff will keep him under wraps, and I think he'll be all right. I think he will need to learn kind of his role though, because I don't think he's not
yeah.
going to be the same like number one wide receiver
No,
on the Texans at all. But to me, it doesn't really feel like I know like in a lot of startups, we're drafting Nico as the wide receiver one, but like before our before we jumped on here, I was kind of thinking about it, and I personally don't really think there is a wide receiver one there right now. We
yeah,
may see it, but I know Tank was kind of the guy there a little bit, but then when Tank went out, then Nico was the guy, and so I think there was a lot of talk in the Discord today, which was cool to see. But I think they're all going to kind of, I wouldn't say cancel each other out, but I think they're all going to take a step back a little bit now, right? I do feel like Nico will kind of drop down in my tiers a little bit, and then same with I think Tank will probably stay the same, and then same with Stephon Diggs. He's not really going anywhere for me as well. So I think the biggest guy that took a hit there was Nico, and then I think it's really really good for CJ Stroud, right, to get another weapon. So I think overall it's good for the Houston Texans in general, as long as they can, that cancer doesn't come over, and I think overall at the end of the day it's good for the Bills as well.
yeah. I mean it's a lot to unpack, right? But I think Stephon Diggs. I mean he's done this in Minnesota and then Buffalo, right? But what I will say is he's always been on his best behavior that first year. So
Yeah, true.
hopefully they get at least one good year out of him.
Well,
The one oh sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say is I did read that I think the way that was like it shook out is they have him on the books as 1 year, and then I do know, like what Ron said in the chat here, 30 million in dead cap for the Bills, which is probably why the Texans went ahead and did it. Is they're not going to carry that as well. But I think they can get out of it after 1 year, right? So say the Texans do really well, it's all goes well. I personally think they should move on. He's going to be 30, 31, 32. So
Yeah. Yeah, the one thing I wanted to point out, so Stephon Diggs, I think I would temper expectations with him going to Houston. I think his days of being the wide receiver one
yep.
on a team are far behind. So I found this actually Joe Marino, he's a Bills fan, but he's one of the draft dudes. He tweeted this out earlier today, and I thought it was interesting. So over the last 12 games of the season for the Bills last year, Stephon Diggs was first in targets with 71 over that time, which is like 15 more than anyone else, and like over 30 more than the third guy in targets. But he was all the way down at third in receiving
Wow.
yards. So he had 71 targets over 12 games for 388 yards, which is
Oh,
pretty just awful.
did
Khalil Shakir, meanwhile, he was third on the team in targets with 33, and he led the team in receiving yards with 422.
wow.
And then Dalton Kincaid was there as well with 56 targets and 406. So um, I would just say Stephon Diggs. Sometimes these guys they start to fall off. When the wheels fall off, they come off quick for some of these older receivers, and
Yep.
he feels like he's heading that way, which is why I'm kind of thinking, Tank Dell doesn't worry me. Nico
Yep.
Collins might be the one that's more affected, but even still, I think Nico's at this point in his career better receiver than Stephon Diggs is. So I'm not overly concerned with those two guys.
Yeah, totally. I have Nico all the way up at wide receiver 14, and I'm gonna definitely drop him down to
Yeah,
the 20 range maybe, and maybe even put him around
sure.
closer to Tank Dell, because people that I have below him right now is Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, DK Metcalf, Devontae Smith, DJ Moore, and Michael Pittman. And I think
Okay.
I'll probably just drop him all the way down to 20 there and have him and Tank Dell right next to each other, right? And I think, like you just said, and I think I said it before, but I think the biggest guy that's going to take the hit is Nico. As I think Tank
Yeah.
Dell is going to still be the same guy he is. And then but when I was looking at it, is I have Stephon Diggs all the way down at 35, and I can't really find guys that I would put above him, right? Like exactly like you said, I think last year he struggled with drops as well. So
Hmm.
I think the wheels are coming off, and I think it's a solid spot for him, right? You're connected to a good quarterback, and I think I'm not saying that in fantasy I still have Josh Allen ahead of CJ Stroud, but I think in comparison
It's got to
to
be close
passers,
now, right?
yeah, it's close, but I think I think the big step that Josh Allen has is that rushing aspect, right?
Sure.
And we don't see that from CJ Stroud, but I think from they're step with each other in passing, and I think CJ Stroud actually is a little bit of a better passer. And so, but I definitely think that for me, I have CJ Stroud at quarterback number 4. I could maybe even put him above Joe Burrow. So I think he firmly
I
is.
would.
Yeah, I think
I'd put
he
him at
firmly
3.
is in. Yeah, at number 3, especially with with all those weapons, he still has Dalton Schultz. So I think that whole team is going to be very, very good.
Do you think the Bills try to trade up now that they have an extra second round pick to try to move up to get one of the big 3 wide receivers? That's the thing I've seen all over Twitter today is that the Bills
Yeah.
are going to try to move 28 in next year's first and that extra second to try to move up to grab one of the big 3 wide
So
receivers.
I did see a ton of that, and I think I did see a tweet that their GM has moved up multiple times to get guys.
Hmm.
Um,
Moved up to get Allen in his first year.
Yeah, moved up to get Josh Allen. I don't think they moved up to get Dalton
They
Kincaid.
did. They
They
moved up
did?
some.
Okay. So,
I
yeah,
think only
so
like a couple spots, but
they
yeah.
moved up, and so maybe they used that second they got to move up. I don't know exactly. I think it will just, depend. That will be something to look at though, because I say someone like Rome Odunze drops in Buffalo.
Hmm.
Oh my goodness, that
Right.
that would be awesome.
That,
So
that was
I
my
think
thought.
yeah, so I think it's possible. That will be something to totally watch. And if it would be spicy to see Roma Dunze with Josh Allen for sure.
Well, that's just what I was thinking because I mean, the Bills are sitting at 28, right? The
Yeah.
3 big wide receivers are probably going to go in the top 10, and
Yep.
then it's just kind of like there's a bunch of guys that
Yeah.
you could take at the back, but what's the difference between the guys at 28 and if you wait until your pick again at, at like 60.
Yeah,
Like
totally.
I think they're about the same. Right? If you take like AD Mitchell, or if you wait and take like a Roman Wilson or like a Lab McConkey or whoever, that's why I think it does make sense to trade if the value's there. But
Yeah,
they have
agreed.
a glaring need now.
Yep, totally. And I personally don't think after the top three, like Brian Thomas Jr., Troy Franklin, I like some of those guys, right? But
Mhm.
they really, really need a wide
You need
receiver.
like a
And
one,
yeah.
and
And one of those top three guys are the only ones I feel like can be the number one in an offense.
unless they think Curtis Samuel or Matt Collins is going to
Yeah.
fill that role for him.
Exactly. Yeah. And I even said in our chat today, I think, part of me thinks they think, oh, Adonai Mitchell
AD
can
Mitchell.
be. Yeah,
Yeah.
but I don't. We've talked about it before.
Yeah, we've talked about that one. Although he would fit, it's kind of the same Stephon Diggs. He
Yeah.
plays good when he wants to, but
Yep.
we'll see.
Yep. Yep.
All right. Some less fun things. Rasheed Rice. He got into trouble over the weekend, kind of racing in his Lambo. Okay. So here's the thing with that. Like, we don't know what's happening. The legal things are
Yeah.
still playing out, right? But I've seen some crazy trades.
Yeah.
And I just like, okay, so I pulled it up. So since Sunday until today, like, here's a couple trades that have had Rasheed Rice. This happened today. Rasheed Rice got sent for Khalil Shakir, the 311, 407. That's a super flex PPR
Jeez.
tight end premium league.
It's
Rasheed Rice for
insane.
the 202 and 206. Rasheed Rice for Khalil Shakir in the 209. Rasheed Rice for J.K. Dobbins in the 205, which, by the way, J.K. Dobbins doesn't even have a team. Like,
Oh my goodness.
people, like, just crazy panic selling. Like, what are we doing, right?
So to me, when something like that happens and somebody like Rasheed Rice is, I always hold, right? Because you're gonna get the
Yeah.
low balls. You're gonna get, like, you're not gonna trade them away for anything good. It's always gonna be low balls. And yeah,
Hmm.
if I have them, I hold. And then what we've all learned, go out and try to buy them as a discount, right? But most of the time, I feel like people are gonna hold because something like this, I don't think it on the surface level doesn't look good at all. But I think, as we've seen some more things come out, like he's cooperating. Um, he's very lucky nobody
Hmm.
got injured, and so I
Yes.
just think at the end of the day, when you make moves like that, you're making mistakes, right? And so it to me, I agree as well. I've seen crazy, like, I've only seen a few of some weird trades in my leagues. I didn't really pin them
Hmm.
to talk about it, but like, in my head with things like that, it's just, in my opinion, just hold, right? Don't
Yep.
make any rash like big changes or anything like that, or go out and try to buy it on the cheap. And most of the time, it's probably not going to happen,
Right.
especially
Yeah. Most
because,
of the time you get instant rejections, and then you just
yeah,
piss off whatever manager you just tried to lowball.
exactly. And for us, we play with a lot of guys that are in, the Dynasty Theory Discord,
Right.
right? And so it's a lot of smarter managers, and so you're not going to even try, right? And so in some of your random leagues, go ahead, send a low ball. It may happen, right? But
Right.
if you have them, in my opinion, hold, and I think the dust will settle, and I think everything will be just fine.
Yeah, I mean, whether it's right or wrong, generally speaking, some of these famous people get differential treatment when it
Correct.
comes to the law. So
Unfortunately.
we'll wait and see what happens. But back to more football news. Raheem Mostert, he signed a new deal with the Dolphins, 2 years, up to $9 million, which is pretty significant money considering he's
Correct.
what,
Yeah.
32
I think
now,
he's,
I
yeah,
think.
32.
Does this worry you at all for Achan, or is this kind of business as usual? We still just think they're going to split carries and
So I don't think it worries me. I think it's kind of like business as usual, right? We saw
sure.
exactly what they both were, how they've used them, and I personally think they might use A Chain a little bit more, right?
That's
Second
true.
year, obviously he was coming off some injuries last year, right? So if he stays healthy, as Mostert's aging, I think A Chain. I think if anything, it's good for A Chain. They didn't go out and get somebody else, right? They're just going to stay with who they have. Um, and so I personally think it's good for A Chain. And I think Ron is rubbing off on me a little bit. Is like, I had all
Oh
this
no.
love and hype for
Oh
A
no.
Chain, but I don't, I still think he's really good and all that. But I moved a share today, and I got my boy Puka. I
Oh, I
moved
saw that.
I moved JSN, and I have running backs galore in that league, and so I felt like it was good. But I've done like a I kind of want to see a little bit more for A Chain before I'm like, hey, this guy's he's still pretty high up in my running back rankings. But
Yeah.
overall, I think for Mostert coming back there, it's solid for A Chain. It's not a positive or negative. And actually, at the end of the day, I think it could be a little bit of a positive, right? Because if they could have gone out and got somebody else, that might have
Right.
hurt him a little bit. So maybe a net positive.
For sure, I think so too, and I mean that's the thing with the Dolphins. So neither Moster or Achan have been, a picture of health, right? So I think there's going to be plenty of opportunities for both of them to get the ball and to
Correct.
score. That's probably one of the, probably going to be a top 5 offense again, with all
Yep.
the pieces they have coming back. So I'm not overly
And
concerned.
and we all saw how many touchdowns Mostert had last year. So I think there's going to be a little bit of regression there, and I think A Chain will pick up some of those touchdowns.
Sure.
I think he'll be another top 10, 8 to 12, top 12 running back next year.
I think so too. I think there's room for both of them. And I was just trying to
Yep.
pull up real quick. Yeah, so Mostert had 18 rushing touchdowns, and Achan had 8 himself too. So, um, I mean, there's plenty of
Yep.
opportunities there for both of them to tote the rock. Now, granted, about half those came in the Denver Broncos game where they just put
Correct.
up about 70 points on them, but
Yep.
it is what it is. Um, Moving on to the last bit of news we have here before we jump into the tight ends. J.K. Dobbins, yeah, I guess he's been cleared to return kind of running and making some moves. He went and visited with the Kansas City Chiefs, and I guess that visit did not go well because the Chiefs said, never mind, we're going to re-sign CEH, which might have been the most damning thing I've ever seen for
Yep.
how dead in the water J.K. Dobbins might actually be. But it seems like now J.K. has moved on to the Chargers, and it seems like they might
Yeah.
be getting a deal. And so the Chargers are just going to try to reunite that Ravens backfield in L.A.
So yeah,
So
it's it. I saw that as well. Like a couple hours ago, I saw that the Chargers. I don't know if it like exactly they were working out a deal or what, but I'm
yeah,
assuming he'll end up landing there in Los Angeles. And it'll be interesting, right? Because I don't know. To me, it was huge to see that he went in and the Chiefs saw him and they're like, oh gosh, we got to sign CEH. Let's go. We got to get him right.
which
And
is
so
concerning. Yeah,
yeah, so that's not good. But there's not going to be much competition unless which we all assume the Chargers are going to grab a running back in the draft, right? Now,
but what if they
I
don't?
personally think what
Well, what if they don't? What if they sign
it,
Dobbins and then they
so
say, okay, we got the Gus Bus and J.K.
then they're going to really suck,
Wow.
and I would
Yeah.
not feel good with that, right? And so I also don't think Harbaugh is going to be like at the end of the day, oh, I feel really good with the wide receiver room I have, and now I'm adding Gus Bus and J.K.
He has
Dobbins.
no
Like,
wide
come on,
receiver room. Yeah.
exactly, right? And so I don't know. The writing to me. The writing's on the wall for them to pick a running
Sure.
back. I
Yeah,
kind of
agree.
feel they're going to take like Corum a little bit. I don't know if that's just kind of where I'm like, but I've seen it,
Yeah,
in some
I've seen it too.
mocks, which I think would be good, right? Those three guys, right, would be okay. And Gus Bus is who he is, and then we'll just have to wait and see if J.K. Dobbins can stay healthy.
Yeah, so the Chargers, they have pick 5, obviously. I think they're gonna use that for a wide receiver. I think they might get like Malik Neighbors,
Yeah.
or possibly even Marvin Harrison if the top 4 go, quarterbacks.
Yep.
And then the Chargers also have an early 3rd round pick 69 overall, which I believe that's gonna be the spot where Blake Corum gets to go.
Yeah.
And so I think you could yeah, basically in your top 3 picks, you get a nice little running back there, and you get a wide receiver upgrade. Could be nice.
Yep.
The one thing that's kind of lost in the shuffle there too is they still have Isaiah Spiller, who they drafted 2 years ago now.
I think yeah,
Um,
21 or no, sorry, 22, 22.
22. Yeah, which he hasn't done anything, but I mean, we'll see. Sometimes a new coaching staff, some of these guys, that's all they need
Yep.
is a fresh set of eyes looking at them. So we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Spiller was behind Eckler and Josh Kelly, so he didn't really get to do much, right? But he was solid, so we'll see. I mean, I think it will depend if they grab a running back in the draft, and we'll see. I mean, I personally think J.K. is kind of dead in the water, but
I do too.
We'll see. I'm not an NFL coach.
Bummer. It would be fun if we were though.
It would be.
All right, let's get into some of these tight ends. We'll start first and foremost with Brock Bowers. He's pretty clearly been the tight end that everyone's been talking about for the last 2 years, really, waiting for him to come out. Dynasty Daddy's rookie ADP has him at 106 overall for Superflex tight end premium leagues, which I think is probably about right. I have him in that 105 to 107 tier myself, so kind of spot in the middle of that.
Yep.
Why don't you kick us off on kind of your Brock Bowers
so
eval?
I love Brock Bowers. I just think he is like your perennial, like cornerstone piece of any franchise, right? So say wherever he lands, there as long like he can only go up if they have like a really good quarterback, right? So say the way I'm thinking is like if he lands in Tennessee or even if he lands in Indianapolis, right? I don't think that's going to drop him at all, but that's not going to be like, ooh, I really want to put him as tight end 1 overall, right? So I think if he were to land on one of those 2 spots, he's kind of like we got to see a little bit more. But to me, he has it all, right? He can block. He's athletic. He runs really clean, crisp routes, and he was like their number 1 receiver in Georgia for all 3 years.
3 years.
He was, yeah, right. And so he's gotten coaches talk him up. All the college coaches talk him up. When they had to play against him, it was they had a rough time. Just I think to me he's like. We were all super excited when Kyle Pitts came in, but to me, Kyle Pitts really mainly only had the athletic piece, and Brock Bowers has the whole pie, right? He's got it all. And so I think the biggest thing with him is like he's very, very physical and good with blocking. And so I think Kyle Pitts is good with blocking, but I think he struggles with some of the route running and things like that, right? So blocking keeps a tight end on the field, but you're not going to use your tight end if they're not very good at running routes, right? I think there's more to Kyle Pitts. Obviously, we're not going to talk too much about that, but I think the biggest thing with Brock Bowers is he is a really, really good route runner, and so you want to get him the ball. And so I have like a dream landing spot at the Chargers, but they're not going to take him at 5. We all know that. But I think a really, I've seen it in many mocks, and so, but I think a really good landing spot for him would be the Jets, right? He's going in with Aaron Rodgers. It's been a while since he's had a good tight end like connected to him, but one that I think of is Jermichael Finley. Right. He didn't have like all these like crazy stats, but he used his tight end. He had a good amount of touchdowns, and he was a solid. I don't even remember if I was playing fantasy when Jermichael Finley was around, but he had a good amount of like I saw.
He was a top 5 tight end for a while.
Yeah. Right. And so with Garrett Wilson already on the Jets, I think that would be a really, really good landing spot for him. And then I also think the Titans and the Colts would be a solid landing spot as well. To me, he's a little bit of like tight end, he's landing spot proof a bit. I just think we will put him up higher if he goes and is connected to a really good quarterback, right? If he's connected to Will Levis, we're going to be like a little bit sad, but I'm not going to, drop him in my rookie draft at all. But if he lands with Anthony Richardson, I think that's a little bit better than Will Levis. It's kind of in the same boat, in my opinion, but the same thing, right? I just think he is a really, really good cornerstone piece for any team. And to me, part of me wants to put him up at like 105, right? I'm leaning in towards like taking Caleb Williams, the 3 wide receivers, and then Brock Bowers, right? Because I'm so worried about like it probably won't, like at the end of the day, it would be hard for me to do, but I'm just worried with all those quarterbacks. Like we see Justin Jefferson, we see Jamar Chase up at the first round of startups, right? And if these 3 wide receivers and Brock Bowers are those type of like players, they're going to end up being in the top, more like the second round than Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase. But to me, they're a little more safe than going with a Drake May, Jaden Daniels, or JJ McCarthy. And that's kind of where my head's at right now, right? This is pre-NFL draft, but I do still like Drake May. I think JJ McCarthy is more of a good NFL quarterback than a fantasy quarterback. And then Jaden Daniels I like, but there's a lot of red flags for him. So that's where my head's
Sure.
at, right? And I feel like so if I firmly have Brock Bowers at like 105, 106 for me, and I wouldn't fault anybody taking him over those quarterbacks.
Yeah, I don't know if I would do it myself, but I wouldn't follow you either. I can see the
Yeah,
rationale behind it, and I think the Bauer's floor is definitely safer, right? Like we've
correct.
seen a lot of times these quarterbacks can flame out and be out of the league in 3 years, whereas like even Kyle Pitts, like who hasn't been awesome, people still believe in it, and he's still
Yep.
being valued as a top 10 tight end. So
So
you can
right now, I have Brock Bowers coming in undrafted at tight end 4, right? And I could probably drop him down below Dalton Kincaid, maybe now, just because I think Dalton Kincaid gets a bump until we know kind
mm,
of what they're doing at wide receiver. But the only guys I have above him are Sam Laporta, Trey McBride, and Mark Andrews. And I probably could flip him depending on the day between
yeah.
Bowers and Mark Andrews. I just think Mark Andrews is still a really, really good tight end, especially, fantasy terms. But I've loved Brock Bowers since he came in to Georgia in freshman year. I watch a lot of college football, and so I've watched him a lot. And like I said, I think he's going to be a really good cornerstone piece for any NFL team.
Yeah, no, it's funny. So Brock Bowers, eh, it's very rare when your analytics for a player and the NFL for a player
A
view
line,
someone super highly and both
yeah,
align. But he's an analytics darling, right? Like
yeah,
he's my top graded tight end that has gone through my model. So and since 2017, only 3 tight ends have scored over a 90%, and it was Brock Bowers is one, Sam Laporte is the other, and then Dallas Goedert was a third one.
hmm,
So all pretty good guys.
yeah.
Have all had pretty successful careers, or at least a single year in Laporta's case. But he's done it like for 3 years. He led, so including as a true freshman, he led Georgia in targets as a true freshman tight end, which is crazy that he's done that all 3 years. The only concern is he's a little he's a little undersized for like a
Yeah.
traditional tight end. And then he didn't do any testing or take any measurements. So do we care enough about that at all, or is it just kind of the same as like Marvin Harrison, where it's like, hey, listen, you've seen me, you know what I can do. I mean, this is my resume. Take me or don't. But
So I personally don't care, but I think it would have been nice to see, especially because we saw that picture of him next to Rob
DeGronk or
Gronkowski, right?
yeah,
Yeah, it was next to Rob Gronkowski, and it made him look very small, right? So it would have been nice for him to go out and see, or nice for us to go out and see kind of his measurements. But just like Marvin Harrison, you know, it's like you've seen me do it, right? Why does it matter?
right,
And so that's kind of where I'm at as well. Like it at the end of the day, I don't think any of that could have helped him. I think the only thing it could have done is hurt
right,
it a little bit. So I think that's where he's at, right? Same with Marvin Harrison. Like if I run a bad 40, that's only going to hurt me, right? And
sure.
so I just think at the end of the day, I think they made the right call on not really doing any testing.
I think so too, and I think really at this point, like he's pretty locked in as a first round pick.
Yep.
I'm not sure where he's going to go. I think you mentioned the Jets would be nice. I think Cincinnati would be another nice
Yeah.
spot playing with Joe Burrow. I think one other spot too is the Dolphins at 21. I think would be nice. They don't really have a tight end, and
Yep.
he would kind of fit that offense really well. Another weapon for Tua, but we'll have to wait and see.
I don't think he's fast enough, unfortunately, for Mike
maybe
McDaniel.
maybe that's why he didn't run the 40 time, so that way he couldn't get eliminated from that just in case.
Yeah, I'm seeing Xavier Worthy getting mocked there, and
Yeah,
I just think at the end of the day, people are like, "Oh, he's fast. Let's put him on the Dolphins." So I don't
it's
think that'll
yeah.
happen. I think they'll end up getting some kind of defensive guy, right? Honestly, just because that team is really good, and they just
They need
need to
some
shore up.
linemen too,
Yeah,
because they got some
our
they got some
linemen.
issues.
They're going to get a boring piece, but that it's only going to help their team. And so I think at the end of the day, it's but I think it would be really cool to see Brock Bowers on the Dolphins as well, right? Tua,
Mhm.
I don't think Tua's had really a tight end, like a really good tight end
Not a
ever.
good one. Yeah, he's had like
And
Durham
so,
Smythe.
yeah, actually, I should probably put with the dream spot. I put the Chargers, but the other one actually would be the Bengals for sure with the Joe Burrow
Mhm.
and having all those weapons would be amazing, right? That would be a really good spot.
All right. So, I mean, with the rest of the tight ends, right? Is it kind of Brock Bowers or bust when if you're going into a rookie draft and you need a tight end, or we'll talk about some of these other guys here, but uh, do you have any confidence in this next batch of guys we're going to talk to about? Can they be a consistent fantasy producer for you?
I don't think so. So I felt
Yeah.
myself keep writing the same thing as, oh, depends on the landing spot.
Yeah.
Oh, depends on the landing spot. Oh, depends on the landing spot. And so, I really like this next guy. He really produced in his sophomore and junior year. And so but I think overall there could be anybody that kind of pops out of these next maybe 3 to 6 guys, right? I think there's a little
Yeah.
bit of a drop off after the next couple guys we talk about. But we could be proved wrong, and it could be any of these guys, to be honest. And so, but there are some things to like about it with Jatavion Sanders. And so, unfortunately, he did not have a very good combine, right?
No.
He did not. So that kind of hurt him, and a lot of people are kind of out on him after his combine. And
Mhm.
there's pro like there to me there's like a lot of things you should be you know grabbing from the combine, right? And but also I don't think that should be the end all be all, right? And so I think there's guys that didn't really do that well across the whole year. Maybe had some pop games, then could kind of show out at the combine, right? And so I think those are the type of guys that were really kind of like what Kevin said is Theon Johnson stand up, right? He's a guy we'll talk about later, but he had a really good combine, right? And I think that's where people, he was at Penn State, and we're like, who the heck is this guy? And then he has a
Mhm.
really good combine, and then he pops out, and then he I think now he's getting some rookie round draft capital. But for me, Jatavion Sanders, he had a really good sophomore senior year. So his sophomore year was 54 receptions, 614 yards, and 5 touchdowns. And then he had a little bit of a regression in the touchdown area in his junior
Yeah.
year, but he had the same amount of yards, basically 682 yards, and then 45 receptions. Right. I'm gonna kind of give a little cop out here, and to me, I think it was a little bit more of Quinn Ewers not being able to use all of his pieces the right way.
Yeah.
And then, but for me, I've had kind of a soft spot for Jatavion Sanders because I really like saw him his sophomore year, and I grabbed him in a couple Debbie leagues. And so I wish he would have had a little bit of a better year in his junior year. But what I really took away from him is he showed up in big games, right?
Mhm.
I'll let you talk about like kind of his stats in those games, but really that's kind of what pops out for me is like he shows up when he needs to show up, especially in the playoff game. He kept being popped up. And so there's some things that I think he needs to progress in, especially blocking, and then like especially blocking overall, and then in the run game, like what Kev just said. He might be the worst run blocking tight ends that he's ever seen. Right. And that's exactly what I put in my notes is that he needs to go to a good spot that's going to help him progress in order for him to stay on the field. Right. Tight ends only stay on the field if they can block and they can help in the run game. If he's not on the field, he's not going to get the ball.
To push back a little bit, Evan Ingram isn't exactly a blocker either. So
True. And
um,
they probably have a secondary guy that, does the blocking, so,
yeah.
there's guys, but the big thing with Jatavion Sanders is that he's like kind of exactly what Kev said is like,
Oops.
he is not a good blocking tight end. And so for somebody that is not like this really good tight end overall, the blocking is what's going to, I feel like is what's going to keep them on the field and give
For
them more
sure.
opportunities.
For sure. So I mean, I think he's kind of projected as like a second round in the NFL draft, maybe early third if he slips a little bit. He was pretty much consensus, I think, tight end 2 until the
Yep.
combine, and people kind of soured on him a little bit just because he came in a little undersized. He ran a little slower for what his size was. Yeah, the one thing I will say about him is that I feel like if you watch him, he plays faster than what
Yeah.
he actually tested. And some guys just don't test well, right? But they play well, which is what really matters. Dynasty Daddy's ADP has him, at the 208. I have him kind of in that 203, 204 tier, so kind of somewhere in that like early mid second.
Yep.
And one
That's
thing you
exactly where I have
mentioned,
him.
so showed up in big games. So I have the stat lines. So he played at Alabama this year, 5 receptions, 114 yards, no touchdowns. The conference championship game against Oklahoma State, 8 receptions, 105 yards, no touch. And then the playoff game against Washington, 6 receptions, 75 yards, no touchdowns. So, I mean, he showed up kind of when things mattered. Um, I think part of his kind of regression back is that Texas, say what you want about AD Mitchell, he was there, whereas the year before it was really just Sanders and Xavier Worthy,
Yep.
and now there's kind of three legitimate options in the passing game. So that might have been a reason why some of his stat line kind of stagnated a little bit. From an analytics perspective, I mean, he hit some of the boxes that you look for in terms of like yards per route run, first downs per route run, receptions per route run. Like he basically, I mean, he hit a lot of the boxes you want. So now it's just where does he go in the draft, right? Like,
Yep.
I think I see on your notes too, you have some couple landing spots for him. It's being like the Rams and the Niners, which I
Yeah.
think is interesting. I think
So the
they both have
reason
needs, and yeah,
Yeah, so the reason I say the Niners is because I think it'd be really good for him to, sit behind somebody a little bit and learn. And that off, we already know that team is really, really good. The coaches are good, and I think that is a spot that he would actually end up being a good tight end. And then the Rams, that's just like a homer pick, but they need a guy, and same thing that those coaches are offensive geniuses, right? And so I think again that's
sure.
another spot that will help him. But I could see him also, with the Bengals. Another one that we talked about with Brock would be a good
Hmm.
spot. But I think overall for him, he needs to go to a spot that they will know they need to help him and help him get better, obviously, right? And kind of like what Kev said, he really needs to kind of get better in that blocking department. And that's
Hmm.
I talk about it all the time, and I think that's what keeps the good tight ends on the field. Obviously the good tight ends that are gonna, catch the ball, like you said, an Ingram, I think they can get away with like their blocking is okay, but Sanders is bad. At the end of the day, his blocking is bad, and so I just think New Orleans as well. Yeah, that would be a good spot. I don't love the quarterback connected there. Obviously, Derek Carr. So but there, whoever needs a tight end and they're willing to help Ja'Tavion Sanders get better, would be a good landing spot, in my opinion.
What I will say about the Saints, Derek Carr loves some tight ends. I mean, he
Yep.
gave Darren Waller his best couple of years there. He made Foster Moreau usable for a little bit. Like
Jawan Johnson.
yeah. I mean, he does pepper his tight ends, so that wouldn't be a bad spot. The other spot I thought that might not be as like exciting, but I think it'd be in terms of like getting on the field. The Commanders,
Yeah.
so they're probably going to take a quarterback, but then they have two picks at the top of the second round, and then one. Actually, they have two in the top of the third round as well. So they have plenty of
Yep.
draft capital to do it. They need more weapons, and they have their top tight end right now is Zach Ertz, who is, I mean, a
Yeah.
ghost of his former self. So I think that's one where he could get on the field and maybe Zach Ertz can kind of coach him up a little bit. But that
Yep.
would be
I actually kind of thought one of these next two guys we talk about would be a good landing spot for the Commanders.
all right. Let's hop into Ben Sanat out of Kansas State. Now he actually did test pretty well.
Yep.
He had a 9.49 RAS score, which is awesome. That's out of 10. So I mean that's almost a perfect score. Now someone that we're going to talk about later actually did almost get a perfect score. So we'll talk about that in a second. But I have him as kind of a third round, in a rookie draft and super flex tight end premiums. Really, it's going to depend on where he goes, right? I've
Yep.
seen mocks, he's kind of projected kind of tail end of the third round, somewhere in the fourth round, kind of that range. And really at that point, like, he could go, it depends on how teams view him, but he could end up being someone's, tight end one. He could end up being, a backup to like a George Kittle or like a, maybe like one of Green Bay, one of their third tight
Yeah.
ends, I guess, at that point, right? So, and then just all of a sudden his values just tanked.
Yep.
Um, he put up some pretty good numbers. So like this past year, he was fourth in receiving yards by tight end in the country in college football. Some of that was just the offense in the Big 12 is a little bit wide open. Obviously he has the RAS score. He's pretty good with the ball in his hands. He now conversely to Jatavian Sanders, Benson Knott is a really good blocker.
Yep.
And he's a really good pass catcher, so he's got good hands. The biggest thing for him is like he needs to land in the right scheme, right? He's not going to be one of those just like wherever he goes, he can just get on the field and just play right away. He definitely needs a team that is going to suit his skill set.
Yep. What I noticed is like like you said it already. He's a really good blocker, but he has good speed, right? I watched a little bit of film
Hmm.
the other day on him, and I noticed he was lining inside and outside, which is a good thing. But at the end of the day, he needs to progress in his routes. I feel like, especially at the top of his routes. And
Sure.
so, I just think, like you said, and we're going to probably talk about it in the rest of these tight ends, is it really will end up where he lands, right? I have him in the same kind of spot as you. I have him at like 311, where I
Sure.
have him in my rookie rankings, going at 311. I have him as my tight end. Let me double check here. I think I have him as my tight end 3. Yeah. But I think I could flip him with Cade Stover any day of the week. But I really did, like, after 3 and 4, I have a bit of a drop off there. And so I just feel like um, those are the next 2 tight ends that I would really feel comfortable taking in, the end of the third or beginning of the fourth round. And it's really hard with tight ends. Like, I feel like we talked about at the beginning of the show, is like, it's fun to do rookie drafts before the actual NFL draft, but I feel like tight ends are like the hardest
Hmm.
player to be like feel comfortable in taking them, because at the end of the day, it's like nobody knew Luke Musgrave was going to be any good until he ended up in Green Bay, right? Like,
Sure.
he came out being good, but then landing in Green Bay, boom, right? He shot up a little bit higher in some of those rookie drafts. So I just feel like tight ends, at the end of the day, their landing spot is a little bit, more important than our wide receivers or our running backs.
For sure, and I think Sanat. The biggest thing he has going for him is he's a really good blocker, so he might end up being one of those guys who is a better NFL player than he is for
Yep.
fantasy. One of the things I did see too is that he does struggle to get like consistent separation.
Yeah.
While he did produce, like, and that's one of the things where like scheme's going to get into play. So like if he ends up in, let's say, just like Miami. Now I don't think he's fast enough to go to Miami, but let's just say he's on the Dolphins. Like, that's the kind of like play caller and like play designer that you want, because you can scheme him open as opposed to
Yep.
just like relying on him to consistently
To
win.
get open.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's kind of the same as like Dalton Schultz, who wasn't the most like athletic guy in the world, but he ended up in Dallas where they used him the right way, and all of a sudden he was like an all pro tight end, right?
Yeah.
I think Sanat could be the same way, but if he goes to a system where they don't know how to use him and they don't like highlight his skill set, he could easily just fade into nothing, right? So
Yep.
we'll just have
100%.
to wait and see.
I think Cade Stover is kind of a little bit the same. There, he has some other pieces that are a little bit better, but I think,
Yeah.
it's kind of the same thing.
I I think Stover's a little bit better of a receiver than Sonat is,
Yep.
personally, and I think he really showcased it this year where Emeka Egbuka was out a lot of the season for Ohio State, and he stepped up as being kind of the number 2 receiving option in that offense, which did kind of struggle in terms of passing, but the Notre Dame game is the one that sticks out in my mind. Kate Stover seemed like he made plays for him just all the time when they needed
Yep.
something. He was there. He's open. He has good hands. He's a big, strong body. I really think, from what I've seen in mock drafts, it seems like he's going to be the one that's a better bet to go higher in the draft than Sonata is. He seems pretty consistently in that third round, so I think the draft capital is going to be there for him. He's a good athlete. He scored a lot of touchdowns at Ohio State. My concern with him too is just he's not like he's fine. He does a lot of things well, but he doesn't do anything that makes you just go like, oh my god, like this
Yeah.
kid's special, right? Like he's just a good player, and
Yep.
uh, but at the end in the NFL, like they're all good players, right? So I don't I for that reason too, like I have him kind of in that same tier as Sanat, as kind of like a third, like a mid to late third rounder. And just I don't know. I don't feel super comfortable with spending a lot of draft capital on him just because there's other guys that I think have a higher ceiling. And Stover could just be a guy that ends up kind of in that, tight end 2 range where it's like you throw him into your lineup occasionally on like a buy Mageddon week and just hope he scores.
Yep. Exactly. One thing I did notice though when I was watching some film is that he's really good in the red zone. Right.
Mhm.
He's got good hands, and he's able to like kind of beat the linebackers. So I think he does have some pretty good speed. But I'm with you 100%. He's more of just a good football player. I think Jatavian Sanders does some things that makes him look like stand out. And then there's also things that make him stand out in a bad way as well. But at the end of the day, Kate Stover is just like a good NFL or good football player, right? And
Mhm.
so I have him in the same spot as you. End of the third, early fourth. Like I said, they're him and Benson Out are my third and fourth wide receiver, or excuse me, tight ends. And if he were to land in a good spot, I could probably not fault anybody taking him over either one of him or Benson Out or Jatavian Sanders, right? Because if he lands in a really good spot and they're going to use him, he's a good blocker. They're going to keep him on the field, right? And also, he's a good red zone guy. You're gonna be used when you need the most, when you're gonna get the most points with the touchdowns, right? And so I just feel like, yeah, and like you said, when Ibuka was out, he was super key, especially in that red zone. He had 41 receptions, 576 yards, and 5 touchdowns. And so he had a really really good year, and I think part of that's because Ibuka was out. But at the end of the day, we know the quarterback really wasn't the best in at Ohio State. So if he could show up there, if he lands on a good spot, he will be a good tight end.
For sure. All right, this next guy here, Jaheim Bell out of Florida State. One of the things I really liked him coming into the draft process. And he's pretty athletic. He's got an 8.5 RAS score, which is pretty solid. One thing that was a little disappointing is he came in a little undersized. So his play height weight was like 6'3", like 240, and I think he came in at like just barely 6'2", and I want to say, let's see, I have his weight below. He was 241, so the weight checked in, but he was a little bit smaller than I thought he was going to be.
Yeah.
Um, Now, the one thing I will say about Bell is that he played in two really just terrible offenses at South Carolina and then Florida State, especially after Jordan Travis went down
Yep.
this past year. But he produced, like, he put up over 500 yards. He had 39 receptions, 2 touchdowns. That whole offense was just pretty bad. But he looked the part. I think one of the things that is a bummer to me is that it seems like the analytics people like him a lot more than like the actual NFL does. I've seen him projected kind of like more in that 5th round, and so I don't think he's going to get the draft capital, which
Yep.
doesn't necessarily. It's not like a death sentence for tight ends. Guys like George Kittle went in the 5th round, so that's not always the worst thing in the world. He produced a lot, in terms of like his speed score, yards per route run, missed tackles forced per reception, all those things. He's not a great blocker. Um, he's basically just like a athletic receiving tight end, which
Yep.
I don't know if he's a good enough receiver to to get away with his bad blocking. Whereas like Jatavian Sanders, I do think is a good enough receiver to
Yeah.
kind of like teams can look the other way on his blocking a little bit. But Bell is just like, nah, I think he's average enough. I don't know. What are your
Yep.
thoughts on Bell?
So I just think he's got a ton of speed, and I think the one thing that kind of stands out with him is he's able to get the yards after the catch, and I think
Yeah,
that's kind of what is where he racked up his yards. And so I'm aligned with you a lot, right? The one thing I did notice though is like he was able to continue to produce without Jordan Travis, unlike
mhm.
Keon Coleman, right? And so I just think he still is uh, a solid player, but when you're not a good blocker, it's going to be tough as a tight end, right? And so, and especially like you said, he's with his lack of blocking and his lack of power, you know, he's not going to be. They're not going to overlook that because he's not this great route runner. I think it's what he does is when he's open, he will get the ball and his speed will take him and he will get those yards, right? And so, I have him in the 5th round of my rookie drafts. If he gets
Yeah,
some better draft capital, I probably could take him at the end of the 4th. But with how deep these wide receivers are, I just would keep gobbling up the wide receivers over someone like Jaheim Bell.
for sure. Yeah, he's a dart throw, not much else.
Yep.
Um, All right, this next guy, this is the Theo Johnson. So tight end out of Penn State. I admittedly didn't really know too much about him.
Yep.
I think because he played at Penn State and that I wasn't exactly a juggernaut offense. That's been pretty pedestrian in terms of the passing attack. But he had a 9.99 RAS score. So that's out of 10. So almost perfect, essentially. What screwed him over was his 3-cone drill was a little bit slower than what they wanted. So bummer. I didn't quite get the perfect score, but he's an athletic freak. I happen to feel like I kind of wrote this down. I think he reminds me a lot of like Jelani Woods in terms of like a big, gigantic, fast, tight end, but is he does he do anything else besides just being like athletic, right? Now,
Yep.
because of that athleticism and because he had such a good combine performance, we've seen time over time NFL GMs they're drawn to that. They love that crap, right? So they're like, oh, this dude's big and he can run really fast. Like I got to get him on the field. Now he didn't really do a ton of like production at Penn State. Like I can pull up his stats, but like
So
he
I just pulled him up, right?
oh,
So he
thanks.
basically 2021, he only had 19 receptions for 213 yards. 22, 20 receptions, 328 yards, and 4 touchdowns. 23, 34 receptions, 341
Yeah,
yards, and 7 touchdowns, right? So I would like to, 7 touchdowns is a lot. So I would like to see more.
that is a lot.
I admit I didn't look too much into him. I think he's just kind of like your combine darling. But I would like to see with that amount of touchdowns is I would like to see if he's a good um, red zone guy, right? That's
Mhm.
what to me kind of seems like it is, right? He's on the taller side, 6'6". So maybe he is a good with being that athletic, right? He could be a good red zone guy. And so we talked about it already. Like some of these guys we were talking about a little bit are more like dart throws, and with him being that athletic, I would feel a little more comfortable with him than Jaheim Bell, right? I know we saw a little bit more from Jaheim Bell in the actual, with his stats and stuff, but you know, at the combine, he was awesome, and so I just feel like Theo Johnson, he could, depending on where he lands, he could be a solid red zone guy.
For sure. So I just pulled it up too. So he had, I mean, 4 of his touchdowns came within, 9 yards of the line of scrimmage. So I'm assuming those were mostly
Red zone,
red
yeah.
zone throws. He had 2 that were over 20 yards, which is pretty impressive, which kind of speaks to some of his athleticism. Um, I just, I feel like he's going to be the one where he gets the draft capital, right? Like we know he's going to. He's probably going to end up being I don't know, the tight end 3 in rookie drafts, I think when all is said and
Mm,
done, because especially if he lands somewhere like, let's see, let's say he goes to like Cincinnati in the 3rd round, right? And he goes to Joe Burrow. Like he might even end up being the tight end 2 of the draft class
yeah.
just because he's athletic and he gets compared with an awesome quarterback. Um, is there is there enough there? Like, where would you feel comfortable taking Theo Johnson?
So if he were to get that draft capital, I probably would feel comfortable taking him where we talked about with Ben Sinnott and Kate Stover, right? The end of the
Okay,
third, beginning of the 4th round. Just because I would feel more comfortable with those wide receivers and even some of the running backs, depending on their draft capital. And so, but I think now that I looked into a little bit more, is I think he is really, really good in the red zone. And so
yep,
if he ends up, say, with Cincinnati and they use him in the right way, I think that could end up being, solid. But I think the issue is he's not going to get you week in, week out production, right? And so if you're going to take him
right.
in the 2nd round, that's going to be rough, in my opinion.
No, for sure, and I would hope he's good in the red zone, being 6'6", right? Like
Yeah,
you would,
exactly.
it's one of those things you can't teach height. But but yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. Like he might just be another one of those tight ends where he's if he scores a touchdown, you're happy. Otherwise,
Yeah,
you're walking away at it with like a 6 point tight end performance out of
yeah.
your.
And
And so,
the tight end, like after the top, I would say like overall, after the top like 15 tight ends. Well, I would even say maybe the top 18 with like Kate Otten now coming in pretty good. It's like
yep,
if he could be like possibly be like a Luke Musgrave, right? I think Luke Musgrave
mhm,
across the field is a bit better, but maybe Theo Johnson has more touchdowns. So something like that. Maybe if he lands in a really good spot, he could crack the top 20. But I don't see him ever cracking like the top 15 or even top 12.
yeah, I agree. I don't think the ceiling's quite there unless I don't know. I mean, I
Yeah.
guess guys surprise you at times, but I don't see it either.
Yep.
And then the other thing I was just gonna say is I feel like I couldn't help but notice going through these tight ends. I just felt like outside once you get past Brock Bowers, and then especially when you get past Jatavian Sanders, I was just like, man, we've been
Yeah.
spoiled the last couple tight end classes, right? Especially last year, right? there's 3 really, really good ones, and a couple extra guys too, were like in like Musgrave and Tucker Craft, where you're like, yeah, I feel good about these guys. Whereas this class, it's just not, it's not there, right? Like
Yep.
outside of Brock Bowers.
Yeah, and even like even I can even say Jatavion Sanders. Like I have a soft spot for him, but like
Sure.
he's got red flags, and so I just feel like you
Mm,
said earlier, it's Brock Bowers or bust here. Like I'm hoping like if I would encourage you to go out and trade for a tight end versus
yeah.
looking to draft one in the rookie drafts, right? Because this year, I think this year, like we were really spoiled last year, but like at the end of the day, most of the time it takes time for these tight ends, and I think we're going to see it more this year than like obviously last year is like what we've seen, right? And even outside of like Dalton Kincaid and other guys, that
Hmm.
overall it takes time for tight ends to progress, and I think we're going to see it a lot with this class.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, I think I would take Brock Bowers over pretty much all of the tight ends from last year, other than maybe
Totally,
Kincaid now, just because Kincaid's basically the only receiving option left in Buffalo.
yeah,
Um,
I
but
would too. I
and
like
then yeah,
I, I before um before what's his name? What like Sam Laporta like blowing up last year? I
mm,
I, I would have taken him. I would have taken Brock Bowers tight end one last year easily, right? And
yeah,
so, I just think for sure this is tight end Brock Bowers or bust for these tight ends, and it's people are like in some of my random leagues, people are kind of like talking about, oh, Brock Bowers, oh my goodness, he's like being overhyped. His price is so expensive, and I don't think that's the case, right? I think right now, like there's some places that you can see like he's already tight end two or tight end three, like, but to me, I've talked about it already. He is going to be a cornerstone piece for any team, right?
yeah,
And the only way for me to be like a little bit bummed is if he lands in a spot that they don't have a great quarterback, right? And if they have a great quarterback, then he is going to be top three tight end for sure, right? But like I said earlier, if he lands with Will Levis or Anthony Richardson, I still think it's going to be solid, but we're going to have to temper our expectations just a little bit.
yeah. I think Brock Bowers, if you really need a tight end, um, you
Yeah,
need to get into that
that's
that 105, 106 range to grab
yep.
him. Otherwise, like let's say you've exhausted all your options, right? And you can't for whatever reason, like those managers just aren't willing to give up the picks. You can't get them. Would you stay and draft Ja'Tavion Sanders? Let's say like mid two, or would
Mhm.
you try to trade for like Michael Mayer, Cole Kmet, maybe Jake Ferguson, Dallas Goddard, somewhere in that range?
Yes, I would. Right, I would feel
I
so
would
much more
too.
comfortable with Jake Ferguson, Cole Kmet, especially with Caleb Williams coming in. Like, I would feel
Yeah.
so much more comfortable with any of those guys than Jatavian Sanders. Like the reason I have Jatavian Sanders up there at like 2-3, 2-4 is just the potential.
Right.
I think it's possible he kind of, I wouldn't say he's going to be a bust, but he's just kind of a meh tight end, right? So I think that's totally possible. And I think when I'm on the clock, say I had 2-3 and my team's like, if I have 2-3, my team was not very good, right? So I'm going to need a more upside guy. And I'm probably not taking Jatavion Sanders there.
Totally fair. I agree. I think and there's a possibility too that he gets pushed down if, let's say, Bo Nix or Michael Penix or hell, maybe even both of them end up getting that first round draft capital. I think both those guys will shoot up and then they jump over Sanders and you start bumping these guys down even further. So
Yep, totally.
we'll see.
Like for right now coming in, I have, uh, let's see, where do I have? I have Jatavion Sanders down at tight end. I have him up at 14, but I haven't updated this since the combine. So I actually would have him down at like 21 underneath Luke Musgrave and Tucker Craft. Right, he's kind of in the
Okay.
same, above
Yeah.
like Hunter Henry, Chiggy,
A hog
and like
daddy.
yeah. So like some of these guys that are kind of nothing. Right, we need to see it from Ja'Tavion Sanders. I feel like before I can put him ahead of some of these guys here.
Yeah, I have Sanders kind of in that same tier as like, a Fryermuth and like a Dalton Schultz and like a
Yep.
K Dot and kind of in that range of just like these guys are probably fine, but you're not going to want them as your tight end one.
Yep, totally. And honestly, I would feel more comfortable with Dalton Schultz than Jatavion Sanders, especially if I want to compete, right? Because I think Schultz will put some points up for you versus Jatavion Sanders. You, depending on his landing spot, he might get you a 0.
My only hesitation with Dalton Schultz now is he might be the 5th best receiving option on that team, just behind the 3 wide receivers and then Joe Mixon.
Yeah, it's possible.
So but I'm with you, like with where your head's at. I just
I got you.
Schultz now, I'm a little worried, but
yeah, we didn't really talk about him with Stephon Diggs coming in, but
yeah, that kind of killed him a little bit.
Yep.
Yeah. So hopefully you don't have a ton of Dalton Schultz. If now you're not going to be able to sell him. So.
I don't. Yeah, no, totally. Like I would hold any Texan. I would hold any Texan right now. Like I wouldn't try to move any of them just because I think you're gonna lose out on any of them.
For sure. Any other parting thoughts before we head out of here?
No, I'm just getting stoked for the draft. A couple weeks away.
Less than a month.
Yep.
So should be a good
looking
one.
Forward to it.
Then it's rookie draft season, which is always super fun. So
yes, sir.
And we'll be there to help you guys out. So keep tuning in. We got some exciting episodes coming up the next few weeks. I think we're doing a My Guys episode, and probably a rookie mock draft in time before the NFL draft. So keep coming back and watching us every week. And peace out, guys.
Maybe I'll let you know about my next Puka. Let's go.
Oh, let's go. The teaser.